Hi, I'm Ilene Frank, Chief Curator at the Connecticut Historical Society, and I'm going to showcase some of the quilts in our Pieces of American History Connecticut Quilts exhibit. This exhibit features more than 30 quilts from the collection and includes other textiles such as dresses. The CHS has more than 200 quilts and bed covers in our collection. Let's take a closer look at some of them. Today, when we think of a quilt, we often think of patchwork quilts comprised of pieces of fabric stitched together to make a decorative top. But in the 1700s, when this quilt was made, quilts were usually what we call whole cloth. This means that there is only one type of fabric that covers the front of the quilt, and not a number of different fabrics pieced together. The ability to afford such cloth is a sign of wealth, and the women who stitched these quilts did so as a leisure activity. Quilting was often included in school or home lessons for elite young ladies. This quilt is an excellent example of a whole cloth quilt. It was made around 1787 and has been attributed to Asenath King Rising, who lived in Suffield, Connecticut. She would have been in her young 20s when she made this quilt, around the same time she married James Rising. James was a prosperous farmer, landowner, and livestock breeder, and they attended the Baptist Church in Suffield. The quilt most definitely displayed the fact that Asenath and her family were well off and had the means to afford the fabric, and that she had the time to do this handiwork. The fabric that comprises the top of this quilt is actually 4 panels of fabric that have been stitched together vertically to give the impression of one expansive piece of fabric. This fabric was imported from England and is a worsted wool known as a shalloon. It's tightly woven, and the glossy appearance that you see comes from a process called calendaring. That is when fabric is rolled or pressed between hot, heavy stones or rollers, and sometimes chemicals such as starch or wax are added to provide more sheen. Here at the CHS, we try to recreate this fabric so visitors could touch it, as the quilt is shiny but actually has a slightly scratchy texture. We spoke with experts from Eaton Hill Textiles who said that researchers and historians have been trying to recreate this fabric but haven't been fully able to do so. It may be that the differences in the yarns or the heating process that we use today in 2020 can't match what they had in the 1780s. The deep color of this quilt is another striking characteristic. Visitors often believe it to be black, but it is really a deep midnight blue. When Asenath stitched the designs into the fabric, she created a surface that has texture. The vines, flowers, and leaves she quilted create small mounds that help the light play off the sheen of the fabric. We don't know what schooling Asenath had, where she might have seen these decorative motifs that come from the high Baroque style, a decorative period from the 1600s. The Connecticut Historical Society is honored that in 1952, a descendant of Asenath and James Rising donated the quilt to the museum, and that we can show it to you today. Before water was harnessed for its power to run machines, all cloth, from carding and spinning the fibers to weaving the yarns to printing a surface design, was done by hand. Cloth was very expensive, and only the wealthy had curtains, rugs, and large closets of clothing. The Industrial Revolution changed those circumstances dramatically by speeding up various textile productions and thus making cloth much more affordable. Pieced quilts became accessible to people of all economic levels because for the first time they had an abundance of textiles with which to make patchwork. The quilt behind me is literally made up of scraps. The fabric used comes from the ends of bolts or rolls of calico fabric. Calico is a multicolored printed cotton. Because these come from the end of the bolts, in some places on this quilt we can see the manufacturer's stamp. These stamps let us know that the fabric is an imported British cloth. We believe that this quilt was made by a member of the Starr family who lived in Woodbury, Connecticut. The quilt is dated to around 1825 based on the manufacturing stamps we see on the quilt. The quilt has seen better days though. It's been cut down from a larger quilt and there are some holes in it that have been backed with linen. In 1962, a descendant of the Starr family donated this quilt to the Connecticut Historical Society, and today we can share it with you.